What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Gudni Gunnarsson, is back with us today to talk about There Is No Sin. Gudni is a household name in his native Iceland and internationally known within the yoga, fitness, and holistic community. He is the founder of Glow Motion, a best-selling author of inspirational and educational books, and a regular podcaster on spiritual growth, physical well-being, nutrition, and prosperity. As a lecturer, Gudni holds regular seminars and workshops for corporate and private clients, both online and in person. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Gudni.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back. It's been a while, and I'm so glad that we can have another great conversation today. And I'm really curious, just to start off before we dive into codependency and shame. What do you mean by the title of your talk today, right? There is no sin.
Well, the concept of sin belongs to religion. And I'm fond of saying there is no sin, but if there was something called sin, it would be personal rejection.
Gotcha. Okay. And so that leads right well into shame, right? From the perspective of personal rejection, and shame kind of going hand in hand. So what is shame? What does that mean to you?
Well, that's another sort of interesting thing or concept to dive into. We talk about shame, and we use the word very frequently, and it's a very empowering word, although we believe that it's a disempowering word, because shame is a part of what we use as motivation. And so we were taught to shame ourselves when we were very young, and we took onto it like candy. And then we use the shame to propel ourselves into action. Some of us call it motivation, but it's a lack-based approach to well-being and to resources and to riches and therefore. But you can't sustain prosperity and shame at the same time. So shame is an addiction, and the addiction is absence. And so we leverage these shames, these concepts that we use to really frighten the daylight out of ourselves because we're not good enough unless. And so that becomes the carrot and the stick. We're not good enough unless, and we will be good enough when. So we've become addicted to the resource of shame, and we're shaming ourselves into the ground.
Yeah,
It's definitely a self-perpetuated process. No one shames you except you.
And how do you think it becomes an addiction?
The rush from shame, the rush from the activity of feeling something, being engaged, even though it's guilt and remorse and shame and negativity, somehow brings us into some kind of experience versus the flatness when there's nothing compelling or driving you, pushing you. So, most of us know how to be absent if we're preoccupied, but we don't know how to be present unless we're preoccupied with something. And that's obviously, that doesn't sound very good, but presence is awareness where there is no shame. And absence is resistance or defiance where there is shame and defiance and stress and absence. So as human beings, we have collectively cultivated this behavior that everything is about obtaining or gaining success. And we're willing to sacrifice our lives to gain success or gain attention or become rich. But once you arrive, you can't enjoy it because you don't feel worthy of it. So it's like dog chasing its tail. And then once the dog catches the tail, the only recourse you have is to let the tail go and start all over again.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting way of describing. I like the analogy with the dog chasing its tail. There it is. And so you mentioned guilt in there a little bit too, Gudni. But could you differentiate a bit more between shame and guilt?
Well, it's really there's not a lot of difference actually. So why do we feel guilty? Why do we feel guilty? And it's an interesting, if we talk about it, Wayne Dwyer said at some point, feeling good means feeling God. And so when we feel good, we feel nurtured and present and in harmony. But when we feel guilt, we feel absent and wronged and deprived. But by whom? Who's depriving us? Who's guilting us? Who's shaming us? Who's rejecting us? We are. Nobody else is. So what's the payoff? What do we get from guilting and shaming and rejecting ourselves? And the answer, the short answer is some kind of an energy surge we call feeling. Feeling important, feeling engaged, feeling alive, even though we're killing ourselves in the aliveness we feel. So there's really not a lot of guilt. Guilt is something we associate with activity or action, something we did to others. But it's really the same concept as shame. We shame ourselves, abandon ourselves, reject ourselves, and then we play the them game. I call it the youth disease, when we are reluctant to take responsibility for our own existence, and we blame the government or the spouse or the children or the environment for how we feel or don't feel. And that causes guilt because we know it's not true. We know we're reacting impulsively. We're not being response-able. We're operating out of that guilt and shame at the same time. And we're making everybody else wrong to justify our own wrongness.
Mm-hmm. And so, okay, what would be your definition of being responsible if that's the case?
Well, responsibility is an interesting concept. It means the ability to respond. So it's the opposite of reactive. So when you're response able, you are not disabled, disengaged from that present moment of yours. And so when you're responsible, you really have the knowledge and the wisdom to understand that there is only one law, and it's cause and effect. Every breath you take has a consequence. Every morsel you ingest has a consequence. Every thought you have has a consequence. But you're not your thoughts and you're not your body, you're a soul. So when you're responsible, you realize that you are essence, spirit, and your presence on the planet is a blessing, and that you use that blessing, that source, to devote the energy at will with purpose and intent. That's being responsible, where you literally allow yourself to be a contributor of wellness and generosity and blessings and love to the environment. And immediately when you become responsible, you also indicated that you have forgiven yourself for the disease of the mind, which is guilt and remorse and rejection. And you have liberated yourself from the thought process or the narrative that you have to sustain the guilt and the shame. That's being responsible.
And okay, so you said a little while ago when you were talking about no one is shaming you or no one is guilting you, right? We might have the experience of someone outside of us saying something that we then say they're trying to shame me or they're trying to make me feel guilty, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's still up to us if we want to feel that way. So can you share a little bit more if people are kind of, I guess, stuck in that spot because they have the experience of someone outside them, maybe a partner or a parent or a boss or whoever, shaming them or guilting them? How does one then take responsibility for that?
Well, it's very interesting that the narrative, the story, your perspective is what you can be responsible for. How you see yourself is how you see the world. So if you see yourself in shame, you're going to see the world shaming you. Not only that, you will be elaborating schemes and stories to justify your perspective by luring people into your narrative, into your script. So you will project on people your shame or your guilt, and you will have and work diligently, subconsciously, by the way, at making yourself right and making them wrong. And it becomes a very, very elaborate system of of engaging people on an energetic level note, because it's a field. But when you perceive yourself as not being good enough or not worthy or shameful, then you are going to project that on other people, and you're going to do everything in your power, knowingly or not, to instigate some kind of behavior on their behalf that proves you right.
Got it. Yes. Okay. So then, given that, right, we're talking responsibility, we're talking shame and guilt. And then I'd also love to weave codependency into this conversation. So, what to you is codependency?
A misunderstanding. We use the term codependency, we use interdependence, independence, and dependence. So what's the difference? Is there a difference? In my language, there's only two ways of experiencing the moment: through resistance and defiance, which is absence, or awareness, which is presence. So when you are reactive, impulsive, you would be considered dependent, because you're in a system of codependency that you've created that is reactive to your reactions. The moment, on the other hand, you become response able, then you have the ability to disassociate and understand the consequences of your behavior, your speech, and therefore you realize that you're impacting your environment consciously, and because you have become responsible for the gifts that you're providing, then you instigate love and compassion and serenity versus resistance and defiance and blame. And so it's a completely different process. And I say to my clients, you say you are codependent, and we are all connected. So there's no one on the planet that's not codependent by that description. The question is, are you present or are you absent? So by definition, if you're present, you're no longer dependent. But if you're absent, you're completely codependent always. And so if we look at it that way, then we start realizing that we're only present maybe 4 or 5% of the time. The rest of it's codependency. And you're just an accident. You're disabled. You're just a victim of circumstances. And you can blame everybody else, including yourself, for everything.
Mm-hmm. And so on the flip side of that, right, interdependence, is that, would that be, obviously we're present, we're aware? Yes,
you're completely aware of your contributions. What are you bringing to the table? What's your intention? Are you in unification? Are you in integrity? Are you vulnerable? Are you present? Are you actively providing or contributing, or are you just taking? It's very interesting if we boil all of this down to absence and presence, resistance and awareness. So everything is just about these two options. In every given moment, you can become aware and present and powerful, or you can become absent and disempowered completely. So what we define as codependency is disempowerment, where we give up our power because we don't want ourselves. Now think about that term. We talk about shame and guilt and rejection and absence. What that indicates is that you don't want yourself the way you made yourself. You're rejecting this moment, this presentation, this grace. You're just rejecting it. You don't want it. And you think because somebody has provided the information that you will want yourself potentially then or when you have possibly bought a wig, or you've grown older, or whatever you've done, there's an attachment to the when after it, and I call that the when disease. So in essence, forgiveness means to want yourself, unequivocally want yourself the way you created yourself, because we have created and cultivated this moment. Every action I've taken has led me to this moment, this dialogue. And if I'm rejecting it, I'm making myself wrong for everything I've done from the time I was born.